it over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Lori. I suppose it was my idea to bring Sasha on to this program because he did such an amazingly enthusiastic presentation to the Garden Club, and I don't know how long ago that was. COVID has changed all of my thoughts of time. But Sasha is also the owner-operator of Sea Bluff Farms with his wonderful partner, Robin Tunnicliffe. So you may know Sasha from that connection. But my amazing connection to Sasha and orchids was partly at the Garden Club, but also my neighbor. I have a wonderful neighbor, and her husband, Mr. Pierce, knew Sasha when he was young. I won't say how young, Sasha. And Sasha got this amazing fascination with orchids from Mr. Pierce because he has an incredible, sadly he's passed away now, but he has an incredible sunroom added to his house, and many of his orchids are still there. And Sasha took this on, I believe, as a special hobby, and today he will tell you the amazing things you can do with orchids. And just for fun, I'm going to show you quickly the dreadful state of one of my orchids, because in the winter time it kind of gets to look like this, but I haven't given up on it. See, Sasha, it didn't open up.
Look at those buds.
Sasha will probably say to me, okay, Jennifer, get out the scissors, and he's going to show you probably how to do that, and torture this poor thing, and then within another few months it'll start looking like a beauty again. So I hope you all enjoy Sasha's presentation.
Right on. Well, thanks for the nice introduction there, Jennifer and Lori. And yeah, what a great day to be talking about orchids. There's snow on the ground, and if you've got a greenhouse or a nice window in your home, the slide of the start of the presentation is from Vietnam, and right now that orchid is blooming. So if you can just duplicate things, you can have orchids blooming in your home and greenhouse right now. So in my greenhouse, I've probably got about a dozen different orchids from around the world in bloom, and you pretty much can have something in bloom every day of the year, which just makes orchids such a special plant, and why they just captivate so many people around the world. It's a huge plant family, and it's a very old plant family, going almost 80 million years ago. Some of the first orchids have been found in fossils, so it's a very old family, and it's the largest flowering plant family in the world. So with that, you get amazing variation. You can see the tiny little orchid on the right, no bigger than a fingernail, and then the largest orchid in the world is on the left there, much bigger than a large sized person. So it's a very diverse plant family, and it's evolved all kind of trickery to trick different pollinators to come in and visit their flower and take their pollen away. So it's just a really interesting plant family. Back to the diversity, you can see here's just 6 different species from around the world, and just not one is even remotely the same. Just so many different colors, shapes, textures, different types of appendages. It's just a really unique plant family. With that, one of the orchid's success is that it produces the smallest seeds in the world. So you can see down below, there's a penny. We don't really see pennies anymore, but you can see this is one of the bigger orchid seeds out there. And look how many are in a little penny there. So the wind can just take these seeds away, and what they lack in size, they have to find a special mycorrhizal fungus to attach onto that. It'll sort of tap into the nutrients, and that's what allows the seed to sprout. So when everyone hears about orchids being these rare and elusive plants, it's actually that special mycorrhizal fungus that is the rare and elusive thing, because without that, the orchid seed can't sprout. So especially these days where we're learning so much about our forests and how the mycorrhizal fungus is so intricate to these ecosystems. Orchids have tapped into this for millions and millions of years. So it's also a great indicator of health of an ecosystem. Most orchids only grow in intact primary old growth situations. So when you break up that mycorrhizal fungus and change the dynamics of the ecosystem, orchids just won't grow. So very, very specialized type of plant family. We could talk for days on just so many different things. So I've tried to make this presentation more of an overview. As Jennifer alluded, there's just a lot more you can do in person. I was able to do a good repotting demo and show different types of trouble plants and things. So we're going to focus a lot on a good overview of the orchid plant family, and we will touch on repotting and things, but I really wanted to just give a good overview so people can kind of see if there's a type of orchid that catches their eye, and how to grow it, and maybe where to get some from. So orchids grow in different types of environments. There's ones that we're familiar in our forests that grow in the ground. Now these are tropical lady slippers, and very similar to our pink lady slipper, they grow in the ground. So there will be soil.
You're freezing up a bit, Sasha. I don't know if that's happening with other people, but at my end, oh, there we go.
All right. Orchids, so trying to figure out where the orchid came from in the wild allows you to try to duplicate what type of environment it grows in naturally, and try to duplicate that into your artificial environment. So these are ones that grow in the ground, and you can get an idea there. Here's another example. And when I've had the luxury of going and traveling in the non-COVID days, and many of the orchids always are in situations where there's lots of good airflow. And you can see this one is just on the edges where there's a riverbank down below, so a little bit more light, but you can start seeing there's just lots of good airflow, and all kind of organic matter that the plant is tapping into. So these are examples of terrestrial orchids that grow on the ground. The most common way orchids grow, especially tropical orchids, are growing on actual trees or branches. So here is a little Dendrobium species from Thailand, and you can see it's got its little bulbs and roots attached to a type of pine tree. So lots of airflow, good drainage, and good light. Couple other examples of epiphytic orchids. These are some giant plants. Orchids can grow over hundreds of years of age if they are in the right conditions. So some of these plants could be coming towards 100 years old. They're weighing a couple tons, and it's just an incredible feat of nature to have such a spectacular display growing on a branch like that. So lots of good airflow, lots of light, and lots of good humidity. A couple more examples. I'm not sure if you can see here, but this is another type of orchid with its big cascades of pink flowers, and you can actually see the roots that are attached to this tree. And you can just imagine a big downpour where everything gets soaked, but then by the time the storm goes away, things start drying out, and then those roots get nicely dried out. So that's one of the key things for growing orchids, is the ability for roots to have airflow and the ability to dry out quickly. That is one of the hardest things to do when growing orchids. Is everybody has that temptation to just give it a little bit more of water, where most of these orchids come from places where they do definitely dry out. Some have dry seasons that last for almost a half of the year where there's no water at all. So getting to understand where the orchid grows in the wild and what its conditions are is your greatest success on duplicating that at home. On top of trees, lots of orchids also grow on rocks. Here is a Bulbophyllum species. You can see its roots attached onto the rock there with some leaves that will decompose and give it a little bit of nutrients, but just that drainage and airflow to the root just can't be stressed enough. A couple more examples of rock growing orchids. These are, again, some beautiful tropical lady slippers growing in little crevices on these sheer limestone cliffs. Quite a spectacular feat of nature for something so pretty to be growing on such extremes. But there's just enough moisture and seepage there where the roots can fasten in and get that good drainage and come up with some spectacular flowers. And we've already touched on these a little bit, but just the basics of any orchid growing, whether you're a top grower or an absolute novice, these four items are what I feel are just a real key to success, is that airflow. Having good air movement, fresh air is a real critical thing for an orchid's health. Light, understanding, does my orchid come from dark, shady places in a tropical forest, or does it come from really bright cliff faces? So just understanding how much light to give your orchid and then matching that at home. Humidity. Most of these orchids come from places where humidity can be on average around 80%. That's hard to do in a home without your whole house falling apart, but there's some tricks we'll talk about on how to duplicate that. But eventually, if you get the orchid bug, you may be investing in a little greenhouse or sunroom, and you've got a better chance of getting higher humidity in there. So humidity is a really another key thing to try to maintain with orchids. And then what we've been stressing in those earlier slides is having good airflow to orchid roots. So if you've got a tropical type orchid, you don't want to put it into a soil pot. You'd like to find a good medium that gets the right amount of airflow to those roots. And we'll go into those in a little bit more detail. On the right here is sort of a cultural excellence. In Japan, there's the largest orchid show in the world called the Japan Grand Prix Orchid Show. And some of the greatest orchid growers display their plants there. This is a Cattleya species that must have gone through a couple generations, maybe almost 100 years old, and just full of flowers. It's an absolute feat to get that to judging, but it's quite spectacular what good culture can do. Now, if we were in person, we'd be able to see these roots a little bit more, but this is a good picture of orchid roots are much different than your regular house plant or garden vegetable. They've actually got a thick membrane that allows it to absorb nutrients and most importantly, moisture from the environment. So you can see these big fleshy roots. And it's okay if your plant has these growing out of its pot. As you saw, many of these orchids are growing on trees, so they're just trying to latch onto something and get as much exposure to moisture and nutrients as they can. the green tip, most orchids have some type of green growing tip, and these tips are really, really fragile. And if you just touched it, it will break and then it'll stop its growing. So you want to be really careful on these green growing tips. If you see these green growing tips, you're also getting a good sign from the orchid that it's actually in active growth. So when orchids are having these green tips, you want to be watering them a bit more. And then if you do use some fertilizers, it's in active growth. So then the plant will be absorbing those. The same plant, if there were no growing tips, it's a good sign that that plant is now in a resting cycle. So you want to start reducing your amount of water and then stop your fertilizing. So that's a very basic way of just getting an idea of where your plant is at, whether it's in active growth or in a resting stage. This is a great picture of a orchid's root system, and it's a very open bark type mix where airflow can go in, and you can see those roots are just going through and grabbing airflow and moisture and nutrients. So this is a good indicator if you're doing things right. And there's all kind of neat pots on the market where this is a clear pot, so you can actually see how your roots are doing. You can also kind of get an idea if your potting medium is wet or not. So this has been a fun way of just having almost like those plexiglass ant pets where you can see the ant hive in action. You can actually see your orchid roots in action with these clear pots. This is kind of an okay picture to kind of get an idea of what some of us might be dealing with. Is my plant's not doing that great. Maybe I better look inside what's going on. So you can kind of see there's some nice, healthy, chunky roots on the side that are alive, but then in the middle there's a lot of decomposed medium, lots of dark roots that if you would pull on them, they'll just fall apart or they'll be slimy. So keeping an eye on when it's time to repot and refreshing the medium and giving the roots a trim that are not alive is some of the basics to orchid repotting. Orchids are one of the few plants where if you cut their roots, they can actually grow more roots. So if you have really rambling roots, you can give them a trim and then they can get going again when the plant goes into active growth. So again, this would have been best in an actual physical demo, but there's actually lots and lots of great repotting videos on YouTube. So if you just Googled repotting an orchid on YouTube, there's just hundreds of different videos out there. And it's a great way to just get an idea of the basics. But you, again, want to have a nice open medium that allows you to get those airflow and balance of your moisture. Some of the products out there, there's all kind of bark-based mediums, which work well, and then also some moss-based ones. Now, over the years, I've found that bark is kind of tricky to grow in because on the top of the pot, it'll kind of dry out quickly, but then down low, it's quite soggy. And then you think it's dry and you'll just keep watering. And before you know it, you've rotted your roots away. So I've shifted to a little bit more of a moss-based thing because when moss is wet, it's a really heavy pot. But when it's dry, it's really, really light. So if you just picked up your pot, you would know instantly, whoa, that's super light. I better give it a water. Versus if it's really heavy, you know, I've got time for things to dry out. So playing around with different types of potting medium to meet your growing conditions. And again, there's a lot out there, but one of the simplest things is a moss-based one where you can just very easily see if it's light or heavy to let you know if it's time to water. Now, on watering, one of the questions I get all the time is the ice cube system a good way to water my orchids? And unfortunately, most orchids come from nice tropical places where the rain is lukewarm and they're in a nice warm environments, and they never see ice or snow in their lives. So putting something very cold on them isn't the best for the plant. Now, if that's a choice between overwatering and doing the ice cube, I'd go for the ice cube because you'll save your plant. But just being able to just water with lukewarm water in your sink or using other ways is the best way. Now, just highlighting some of the fundamentals. Just getting a little fan, this is a mounted one, but even a little desk fan in the corner of your room just to get some air circulation can be all that it takes to get your little orchid environment having that airflow so you don't get mold spores and fungus developing in your little orchid corner. So there's just all kind of little fans out there. I've even seen little computer fans. People can just put a little computer fan near their plants to get a little bit of airflow. So it can be something that simple. Bottom left, a spray bottle. That's one of the easiest ways to get increased humidity, is just a couple times a day when you walk by your plants, just give them a little spray. There's some incredible success stories of orchid growers in a Toronto apartment that just were diligent with their little spray bottle, and they've grown and flowered some award-winning plants. So a simple spray bottle can go a long way. To help with the humidity, that's one of the toughest challenges, is getting humidity in your home. There's custom kind of humidity trays where the plant is on top of water but not sitting in it, and you can find those at nursery stores or online. Another cheaper way to do that is just get a saucer and put some gravel and then put a little bit of water there. The key here is not having your actual pot sitting in the water because it'll wick it up and then you'll overwater things. And something as simple as these ice cube trays, you can have a really easy idea of where the water level is, and then just that ambient evaporation just makes a little microclimate for your orchids. So this looks really rudimentary, but believe it or not, these tiny little simple things can just make a difference and make your little orchid window or corner that much successful, rather than someone that just has one sitting there. So that's kind of a bit of an overview of just some culture basics. So now I'd like to just go through some of the types of orchids that are available out there, and just giving you some rough ideas if, hey, maybe that one might work in my bathroom, or hey, that one might work in my living room. So the most popular and easily available orchid is the Phalaenopsis orchid. I'm sure everyone has seen these in every grocery store and every big box store. They're now being able to be mass produced in Southeast Asia at incredible speed, and which has lowered the cost to, I've seen like $9.99 orchids. So it's just incredible what that mass production has done. When well grown, they can just be absolutely spectacular. Lots of flowers, they last a long, long time. Now, these orchids come from Southeast Asia, and most of them come from lowland areas where they have warm evenings. And now I find that that's a hard one to do out here on the coast, where our ocean always cools down our evenings. So a lot of times people have a challenge getting some of these to grow well because they just don't have warm enough evenings throughout the year. So again, getting an idea of what kind of species were in the background, and were they the lowland warm growing type of Phalaenopsis, and then trying to have your nights a little bit warmer to have these really thrive. I find a lot of these grocery store ones, they come really well grown from the store, and then they just kind of struggle on the kitchen table because we just don't have that that warmth that these orchids enjoy. And these come usually grow on tree trunks deep within a forest, so they're not going to be a high light type of orchid. So if you put this right in the front of your sunroom, it's not going to be the happiest plant. So this definitely likes filtered light, not direct full sun. One of the classic Cressaz orchids of the 1930s and 40s, where all of the famous people had these beautiful orchid corsages, are Cattleyas. You don't see these as much in the nurseries, but for more specialty growers, you can find these beautiful orchids. Just a huge flower, beautiful fragrance, and these orchids like more light. So this is a more better one for a bright window or at the front of your sunroom, and just some spectacular shapes. And there's types of Cattleyas that bloom almost every time, every month of the year. So you can have winter flowering ones, spring, summer, fall, and have a type of these blooming year round. So it's a really neat one to get into. And it used to be so popular in the early, late 1800s and early 1900s, but there is definitely a resurgence in this one. So bright light, you can see it's got these big bulbs, so it has lots of water storage. So these plants all come from distinct wet and dry seasons. So watching your roots, if they're green, meaning it's active growing and the plant gets lots of water. And then when those green tips stop, the bulb is full of storage, and it'll go in a rest period where you want to make sure it dries out really well. So that's a good one for a nice sunny area. Dendrobiums, I think both of these are getting more and more available at all kind of nurseries and some of the box stores. They're very showy, last a long time, but there's two totally different types of growing between these. The ones on the right are really hot growing and warm nights, where the ones on the left really like it on our coast because they really like the cooler nights. So we'll go into those a little bit more. So those one on the left are called Nobile type dendrobiums, and they've got these large bulbs that have all kind of leaves. But then when the bulb is mature, the plant will actually lose all of those leaves and then go into a resting period. And that's when it likes to have almost no water and cool nights, which allows it to rest and then trigger a flowering hormone. So if you don't get those cool nights, this plant won't bloom. So this is a really good one for our coast. They like good light during their growing season in the summer, and then you can kind of forget about it, give it a cool, bright corner, and reduce your watering. All your leaves will fall off. You may think you've just killed your plant, but it's doing its thing. And then you'll get these little buds and get a beautiful display. So when you're in the nursery, look for the Nobile type, and that's that kind that does well for us. The other kind of dendrobium is what is called a Phalaenopsis type. It's got similar flowers to the Phalaenopsis, but these come from really hot lowland areas in Australia and Southeast Asia. And these are hard to grow here on the island because you just don't get those warm evenings. So this one's a bit harder to grow, but it's a very showy orchid, lots of light. And this plant doesn't lose its leaves, so it'll keep its green leaves throughout. So that's a good way to see the difference. Is the other one loses its leaves, where this one holds its leaves and likes the warmer nights. So when in doubt, try to see if you can get the name of the plant at the nursery, because it tells a lot to you of how to grow it. And you can see if you get one and you don't know that it likes the warmer nights, it's just going to struggle there for you. So keep an eye out for the names on the pot. Another orchid that you might see at nurseries are called Oncidiums. They're also called little dancing lady orchids, and they just get these big sprays of these little, some people see a little dancing lady in there or a little person. They're just a really pretty, big showy display, and a well-grown plant can actually look like this. It's just spectacular. I think there's over 5,000 flowers on that plant, and it's just a cascade of little dancing ladies. So these plants come from Central America and South America, and they kind of need not full sun, but not full shade. They're quite easy to grow. They're very vigorous. They've got a big bulb with a nice leaf. So they've also come from a distinct wet and dry season. And you've got tiny little fine roots with the green tips. So this is a nice one. It's a bit of a forgiving plant, a good one for beginners, and you get a real display with these big cascades of flowers. So some do come from a lower elevations, but you can kind of, they've mixed them a lot over with the hybridizing, and most of these do well on our island. So Oncidium is a neat one for the beginner. Cymbidium, this again is a classic older type orchid, definitely was part of the orchid corsage craze as well. And you see this in a lot of wedding flower arrangements, and really used a lot by florists. And this is another orchid that does really well on our coast. These plants come from Southeast Asia, higher up in elevation, where the plants grow really well in their warm summers, and then in the winter, where the dry season comes, the plants take a break from growing. They need a dry period, and the key to blooming these is getting cooler nights, so that again a flowering hormone gets triggered, and then in the spring you get treated with these big showy blossoms. So this is quite readily available even in some box stores, but these plants can get really big. Average ones are about three feet high, and they can really take up a good corner of your sunroom. So you want to make sure you've got some space for these, but what they have in size, they will also produce large flowers. So it's a really showy plant and can be quite satisfying. And these orchids, they grow kind of a bit in the ground and a bit on a tree. So this type of medium can be a little bit more forgiving if it's not as airy and bark type like some of the other ones. So there's a lot of information out there on Cymbidiums, and they do well in our climate. Yeah, this is one of the species ones that those hybrids have come from. So that's my little plant there, just two little bulbs, and it put out such a big flower spike. So it's a very, very satisfying, and lots of those smell as well. Paphiopedilum, or slipper orchids. We've got our little pink native one that maybe a lot of you have seen on a hike, but these have just been one of the most sought after orchids in the orchid world. And they're also a bit challenging to grow. You can see down here, there's just leaves, so they don't have any bulbs to store water. So you have to kind of keep them moist throughout the year, and they're not as forgiving of getting underwatered or overwatered. So they're really more of an advanced orchid to grow. Lots of them come from very shady locations, and are almost can grow in very little light. So it's a really neat one, and some have really beautiful foliage. So Others have all these crazy tails, and yeah, it's just a really diverse family of orchid. But I've seen these in garden works for sale, and they look spectacular, but they are one of the hardest ones to grow. And some of these, they bloom maybe every 3rd year after you've grown it for a long time. So they're one that won't be giving you a lot of flowers all the time unless you have the culture mastered. So if you have one flower, it may take up to 3 years for you to get another flower. So it's not the most satisfying orchid to grow for someone that likes to have lots of flowers. So definitely something to aspire to, but definitely very, very pretty. Something that we see once a while, but it's very underrated, is they're called Masdevallias. These are very small orchids from tropical South America. They grow on branches of cloud forest trees, so lots of moss and lots of humidity and moisture. And they're actually really good on Vancouver Island. Some of the best growers are from the island and San Francisco and the whole West Coast, because they love cooler climates and that really cool night temperature. You can see for size on the left, you've got a huge plant just in a little pot that fits in a person's hand, and you can get some really spectacular colors, and they can bloom multiple times a year. So this is a really satisfying plant to grow, and it likes to be moist all the time, so it can handle a little bit more of overwatering. Yeah, it's too bad this isn't available a little bit more in our local nurseries, but I can give you some tips on where you could find that. But Masdevallias are really neat, a good beginner plant, and something that can grow in your bathroom window. You've got higher humidity, not too much light there, and you can get a little show of color in there. So definitely one to keep an eye out and do some research on. A good beginner plant. And that gives an sort of an overview of some of the main orchid families that are out there, and what's some that do well in our environment. And I wanted to end the slideshows with a few pictures from some of these spectacular orchid shows that are out there. This is from Germany, their biggest orchid show, and you can just see some beautiful displays of really well-grown and diverse orchids. This is from a Taiwan International Orchid Show. Absolutely everything here is an orchid. Even down low, these little white sort of cups are these lady slipper species. Yeah, this is just, you know, a true spectacle of what orchid growing and these big shows can be like. So if you ever have a chance to get to a show, if they ever come back after our virus challenges, they're really spectacular to go and see. And you can have something as simple as this, just some little ones well presented, and something to strive for as a little hobby grower is to put together a little display of your plants that you've worked really hard to grow. So that's my presentation, and I definitely wanted to leave a lot of room at the end for questions. We've got not too big of a group, so hopefully there's a few questions that I can answer, and I hope I've given you an overview that got you inspired to try an orchid, and the key is to match the right orchid to your growing conditions. So thanks for joining me today.
Wonderful, thank you. So interesting. If anybody has questions, just unmute and ask, or you can type something in the chat and I'll keep an eye on the chat. Oh, there's Patty.
Yeah. Hi there, Sasha. This was wonderful, most enjoyable, most interesting. I don't have so much a question as just I'm amazed at this. I don't know if you'll be able to see it very well. Yeah. Phalaenopsis that my partner gave to me in February 2019, that has been blooming ever since.
Fantastic.
And here it has 3 new spikes on this stem, 1 new spike, and the original spike.
Wow.
Getting ready to bloom on this end. And of course, I mostly ignore it. You know, I water it. let water run through it and then drain thoroughly, maybe twice a month. I have sprayed it with orchid food periodically. The main thing I do have a question about is that the leaves don't seem to be as happy as they should. You won't be able to tell, but they're yellowish rather than bright green. And I wonder if you have any comment on that.
So first off, you're doing an amazing job, and that's a good example for those type of orchids that if you don't, if your flower spike finishes blooming, and if you leave it, it'll go through its cycle, and then it will rebloom on that same flower spike. So you can have multiple successions, as Patty's has, of flowers that keep going and going. So there's definitely that to keep in mind. Some people, once it finishes flowers, they actually cut off the spike and then they let the plant do a more growth cycle. But then it has to then produce a whole new flower spike. So it depends. Sometimes those plants can kind of flower themselves to death, but yours is looking really healthy and is doing well. So yeah, you can definitely keep those flower spikes on and they'll keep going. As to the yellower leaves, usually that's an indication of a little bit more light than it's used to, or a bit of a deficiency in the nitrogen there. So it could be, I'm not sure what type of light condition you've got in it, but sometimes that would be that you've got a little too much light, or it needs a little bit of fertilizer. But with all those spikes, it looks like it's happy. So
good. Yeah, I my guess is that the light, this is in the bedroom window, which faces east, but we have a hill behind us, so it doesn't get much direct sunlight. And my feeling has been is that the light location is what's made it happy, because my orchids that are elsewhere just sit there. But the nitrogen is a good tip. I could certainly try that using a fertilizer that has a bit more nitrogen in it.
Yep. Yeah, and I think because it's flowering so well and putting out more things, I wouldn't really move its light condition. I think that's doing good, and maybe just a little bit more fertilizer there to green up the things. Now, the older leaves at the bottom of the plant, they will naturally turn yellow and fall off and die off. So don't be worried if the bottom leaves are yellow. If the top leaves are yellow, then yeah, you want to be that's a bit of a concern. So no, you're doing a great job.
Great, thank you, Sasha.
Sasha, I have somebody in the chat that's posted a question. She says, thanks, Sasha, that was great. Wondering about a source for the Masdevallia.
Right on. So Garden Works right now has their sort of they're going to be having, usually in February they do like an orchid festival, and I've seen them bring in Masdevallias. They can be a bit pricey, but they usually come from a good source, so keep an eye out for Garden Works. But there is actually a great commercial nursery on Vancouver Island. It's up in Qualicum Beach. It's called Paramount Orchids. So if you just Google Paramount Orchids, they've got over 30,000 orchids up there, and they have lots of different varieties, and they've got different kinds of Masdevallia. So it's a really good source to support a local grower, and you get access to the different kinds of plants. So I would try to look at Paramount Orchids website, and you can definitely get some Masdevallias from there. Or keep an eye out for Garden Works kind of now, January, February, they may get something in there.
Sasha, I don't have a hand to raise, so I'll just jump in.
No worries.
Now I've forgotten the type of orchid I have. Starts with F or PH. One of the common ones. Anyway, what I'm wondering is the roots have now sort of come up probably a couple of inches over the top of the pot. And the whole orchid is doing really well. How would I know when it needs repotting?
So one easy way is just to kind of stick your finger in near the base there and just dig around. And if your medium is all dark black and kind of really soily and not much no bark chunks or airy fresh medium, the orchid doesn't like to be in that decomposed old medium. So that's one way to have a look. You could also just gently pull the pot out a bit and just have a look at the roots and see if you can see how degraded your potting medium is. But a lot of plants, you know, if it's got nice roots coming out and it's healthy, it can be there for a long time. And sometimes most of the growth will be the roots that are in the air. That's where most of the growth will happen. So that's a couple tips. And one that really is a sort of a red flag one is if the whole plant is kind of teetering and you can move it, it's just kind of flopping around. That's a good sign that you've rotted out the roots and it isn't happy. And then I would pull it out and give it a repot. But if your plant is solid in its pot with lots of healthy roots, you know, I think it's fine.
Okay, thanks, Sasha.
Sasha, I'm just, I was going to pull my orchid out just to show people not to be, I think, too afraid to have a look at them. They pull out of the pot very easily and put them back in again. And then you can see, you know, how the roots are growing. So I think you told us too in the garden club, don't be afraid to have a good look at your orchid every
Yep.
now and then.
Yep. And yeah, and that's especially true if you don't have one of those clear pots. It's kind of hard to know what's happening there. So if you just gently pull it out like that, you can go, oh, it looks still fresh. I've got some good root growth. Things are happy. So yeah, don't be afraid to have a peek down there.
Am I translating?
Hello.
Chris, it's a joy in the springtime, Sasha, to go into the woods and very carefully get down to smell the calypsos. It's just a heavenly fragrance. Do the same properties cover other orchids, or is this a specialty of the calypso?
So on the island with our native orchids, there's only 2 that smell. So the Calypso is one that has a beautiful fragrance. Yeah, I didn't know that till about 10 years ago when I was doing some photography and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. So that's one that smells. And then there's one, it's called Platanthera dialata. It grows in sort of bogs, semi-alpine areas, and it has a beautiful fragrance. So we've got 2 fragrant orchids on the island. And then for tropical orchids, some have fragrance and others don't. So you can definitely, like most Cattleya species have fragrance, some Cymbidiums have fragrance. Unfortunately, the Phalaenopsis, the most common one that we get in the grocery stores, don't have a fragrance. So some people, I know, I've been growing orchids a long time and I've now gotten picky and I almost only want ones that smell because it's such a nice thing to have. But yeah, it's not, fragrance isn't for every orchid. It's specific to the type of genus and the species within there. So a good way if you're at a nursery is to go down and try to smell if it has fragrance or research. There's a lot of online information. Like if you would go for those Masdevallias, there's about 5 species there that smell very sweet, kind of fruity, but most of them don't smell. So you could just try to research which one of those smell and try to get those. And then there's some orchids that actually duplicate the smell of carrion or feces to attract special flies. So you want to be careful on those. It may say fragrant, but it's not fragrant to us. So yeah, they've evolved all kind of tricks to attract pollinators.
Thank you.
I have a question, Sasha. Regarding fertilizer, general fertilizer, is there something I can make myself, or is it best that I just go to a garden center and purchase a fertilizer specifically for orchids?
So, with the fundamentals of air, light, humidity, and potting medium, a lot of people get hung up, oh, I better fertilize, but you can grow really nice orchids without that, without fertilizer. And there's all kind of fertilizers out on the market, and I'm sure lots of nurseries will want you to go away with a fertilizer and an orchid. So, but at the end of the day, just you could just make a little a kelp for vegetables. You could just do a diluted kelp spray for foliar feeding, or a very diluted amount for the plant. So it could be just something that simple, or you could go with a off-the-shelf orchid fertilizer. But what I would always recommend is always be a little bit less on the fertilizer, because if you are a little bit too concentrated, you can burn the roots and really set back your plant. So less is more till you really get the hang of it. So yeah, something as simple as a light kelp vegetable thing could help easily. So
Thank you. And then in the chat, there's a question from, it says, hi, Sasha, Jackie here. Thanks for this presentation. Scale, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. How to deal with it?
yeah, that's a nightmare pest. And once you get it, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. So one of the most effective things that I've found is to just take the plant out of the pot, get rid of all the medium, and just meticulously with a Q-tip and a toothpick is just go through and wipe off all of the scale. And you can use isopropyl alcohol when you do that. That also helps to kill them there. And then there's some good insecticidal soaps like Bug Be Gone or End All that once you've manually got rid of all the scale, you can spray for that, but it's not guaranteed to eliminate them. They've got eggs and they hide in the tiniest of corners. So basically I would do a full cleanup and then repot the orchid, because the scales can be in the medium and have laid eggs there and then just come back up. So you want to give it a full fresh repot, full manual clean, and then just monitor anytime you see one little one, just get rid of it and maybe do a weekly spray with the insecticidal soap to discourage anything there. But they're a real nasty one. They can spread to all your orchids. And one of the most devious spreader are little ants, because a scale produces a bit of like honey, a bit of nectar like aphids, and the ants will want to spread the scale around so that they can harvest more of that sugar. So if you've got any ants in your growing area, they will spread that scale like wildfire. Oh yeah, and one more quick one on the scale. Sometimes a plant can just be so infested that you just have to throw it out because you just don't want to risk it going to all of your other plants. So that's sometimes a tough love, is just assessing, is this too far gone? I might have to just get rid of it. So yeah.
Can you just go to Garden Works or somewhere and look to get orchid medium? And do you have to know what kind of orchid medium to get to repot?
Yeah, most of the nurseries have a good selection of all kinds of different mixes. They've got straight bark, they've got bark and perlite, they've got bark and moss, or they've got straight moss, and then you can kind of make your own mix. So basically the more general rule is if your plant doesn't have those bulbs that can store water, your plant is going to more rely on having a more moist medium. So those plants will need more moss in the medium to keep it moist. Whereas if you've got a plant that's got the big bulbs, you know that that's coming from a place that has wet and dry seasons. So you'd like to have something that has more drainage and the ability for things to dry out. So just doing some research on, does it come from places with wet and dry seasons, and does it have bulbs for storing moisture?
Thank you.
Well, I don't have any more questions in the chat. Maybe we'll do a last call for questions since it's 4 o'clock. Does anybody have any more questions? Chris, you're on? Chris, can you turn off your mic or turn on your mic?
No, I found it a very interesting discussion, Sasha, and detailed. I know a lot more about orchids than I did an hour ago. And thanks for
Excellent.
answering my question.
Right on. Well, thanks everyone. That was great for attending on a snowy day, and I hope maybe next year this time in the snow you'll have some nice orchids to keep you company. So it's a great hobby and lots of fun.